The wind in Wyoming did not simply blow. It scoured. It pressed against a man's chest like a physical weight and stripping the moisture right out of his eyes. But that was 1883. The wind still blows the same way now in 1941, though the man sitting in the oak rocking chair can no longer feel it the way he used to. Nathan Bridger is 84 years old, his hands gnarled and spotted with age rest on the stock of a Winchester rifle that has passed through 3 generations. The wood is worn smooth in places where fingers have gripped it over nearly 60 years. Outside the window of his farmhouse, the November wind howls across the Sweetwater Valley, just as it did that first winter when everything began. Across the room, standing by the window with a piece of paper clutched in his fist, is his grandson Thomas, 18 years old, young, afraid. The paper is a draft notice. Tomorrow morning, the boy will board a train headed east to a training camp, and from there to a war burning across Europe and the Pacific. Thomas stares out at the darkening prairie, his reflection ghostly in the glass. His shoulders are hunched forward as if trying to make himself smaller. Nathan recognizes that posture. He has seen it before in mirrors and windows a lifetime ago. The boy speaks without turning around. His voice is quiet, almost swallowed by the wind rattling the window panes. "Grandpa, I'm scared. I'm not soldier material. I'm not strong like other men." The old man shifts in his chair. The wood creaks beneath him, a sound as familiar as his own heartbeat. For a long moment, he says nothing. The mantel clock ticks. A log settles in the fireplace with a soft pop. The wind finds a gap somewhere in the walls and whistles through it, high and lonesome. When Nathan finally speaks, his voice is rough as gravel, worn down by decades of Wyoming weather and hard living. "You think I was strong, boy?" Thomas turns from the window. His face is young and uncertain, eyes searching his grandfather's weathered features for reassurance. "But you built this place. You fought off Blackwood's men. You walked through bullets." Mom told me the stories. Nathan's eyes, gray and faded but still sharp, fix on his grandson with an intensity that makes the young man straighten slightly. "Let me tell you about 1883, the year I was 26 years old. 8 years older than you are right now, the year they called me the weakest man in Sweetwater Valley." Thomas moves away from the window, drawn by something in his grandfather's tone. He has heard stories before, but never this one. Never told this way. "You weak. Sit down, Thomas." The young man settles onto the stone hearth, the heat from the fire warming his back. Nathan's fingers stroke the rifle stock, back and forth a meditation. "This is a story I never told your mother. Never told anyone except one person, and she's been gone these 3 years now. But you're going to war tomorrow. You need to hear it. You need to know that fear doesn't make you weak, son. It's what you do with that fear that defines you." The old man closes his eyes. When he opens them again, they are looking not at the room around him, but at something 60 years distant, vivid as yesterday. November 1883, Millstone, Wyoming. I was waiting at the train station for a wife. The room seems to shift. The present fades. And Nathan Bridger, young again, in memory, stands once more on that wooden platform, hat pulled low against the wind, waiting for a woman he has never met. The telegraph wires sang their mournful song overhead, high and thin and endless, like the wind had found a voice and was using it to keen across the prairie. Nathan stood with his back to the town hands, twisting the brim of his hat into a shapeless mess he would have to work back into form later. He was tall, broad in the shoulders from years of lifting beams and wrestling calves. His hands were calloused and scarred from honest work. They could build a fence or calm a spooked horse. Right now, they were trembling with a fear that no stampede had ever put in him. 26 years old, and the sun and wind had already carved fine lines around his eyes. But despite his size, Nathan held himself with a quiet, shrinking posture, like a man trying to take up less space than God had given him, like he was apologizing for his own existence. He was waiting for a wife. The thought made his stomach turn over in a slow, sickly rotation. He had not done this out of desire. He had done it because the silence in his half-finished cabin had become unbearable, because a man alone in this country was a ghost before he was dead. And if he was being honest with himself, he had done it because the thought of walking into the brothel on the edge of town or trying to speak to the daughters of the church congregation paralyzed him with a shame he could not put into words. A mail-order bride was a business arrangement, Paper and ink. Safe. Or so he had told himself 3 months ago when he sent the letter and the bank draft for her ticket. $47.50, nearly 2 months' wages. The ticket represented hope purchased at a price he could barely afford. Behind him, the town of Millstone looked like it had been nailed together in one bad week. False-fronted buildings, raw timber shacks leaning into the endless wind. Two men sat on the porch of the general store with their boots propped up on the railing. One of them was Wade Cutler, a thick-necked ranch hand who had delighted in tormenting Nathan since they were boys together in the one-room schoolhouse. Wade pointed at Nathan and laughed. The wind snatched the sound away, but the gesture was clear enough. The other man laughed too, slapping his knee. "There goes Nathan," they would be saying, too soft to court a girl proper, so he had to buy one from a catalog, like ordering a plow or a milk cow. What kind of man does that? What kind of woman agrees to it? Nathan turned his back to them more fully. His face burned with shame despite the cold. The temperature hovered around 40 degrees, but the wind made it feel 20 degrees colder. He wore a wool coat he had sewn himself, the stitches uneven but functional. Beneath it, a holster held a Colt .45 Peacemaker that had belonged to his father. Nathan had never drawn the weapon in anger, was not sure he could even if his life depended on it. Violence came so natural to other men. They understood its language, its rhythms and rules. Nathan did not, could not. The thought of hurting another person made something in his chest clench tight and painful. He glanced toward the town again. Beyond the general store, he could see the church steeple. Beyond that, the small cluster of houses where the respectable families lived. Mrs. Harlow's white-painted cottage, the Reverend's larger home, the lawyer's office above the feed store. This was Millstone. Population maybe 300 souls depending on how you counted and whether you included the ranch hands who drifted through. It was the only settlement for 50 miles in any direction. The railroad had come through 5 years ago, bringing with it dreams of growth and prosperity that had not quite materialized. But the train still stopped twice a week, and that was enough. A low rumble vibrated through the planks beneath Nathan's boots. He looked east down the iron rails that converged in the distance like two lines of prayer aimed at the horizon. Black smoke smeared the sky. The train was coming. Nathan's heart hammered against his ribs. He wiped his palms on his trousers, leaving damp streaks on the rough fabric. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to mount his horse, which stood hitched at the post near the water tower, and gallop back to the safety of his empty claim. To write a letter of apology and send the woman back east with money for her return ticket. But Nathan Bridger was a man who kept his word, even when his word terrified him. The locomotive grew from a speck to a roaring iron beast. The sound built and built until it was all there was in the world. A grinding, shrieking symphony of metal and steam and human ambition made manifest. The ground shook, the air filled with the smell of coal smoke and hot iron, and something else, something like sulfur, acrid and overwhelming. The train screamed to a halt with a sound that set Nathan's teeth on edge. Steam hissed and enveloped the platform in a damp, sulfurous cloud that stung his eyes and coated his tongue with the taste of industry. For a moment, Nathan could see nothing but white vapor. Then shapes began to emerge from the mist like ghosts taking form. Passengers descended, a salesman with a sample case moving with the brisk efficiency of a man who had made this journey 100 times. A family of homesteaders looking bewildered and dusty, the father's eyes already calculating the distance between this depot and wherever their claim might be. A few miners heading up to the hills, their clothes dark with old earth, their faces harder than the rock they sought. And then her. She stepped down from the second car with a slow, deliberate movement. One hand clutched a small battered trunk. The other held a worn leather Bible, its cover dark with age and handling. Her dress was dark gray wool that had seen better days patched neatly at the hem. A bonnet hid her face until she lifted her chin to scan the platform. Clara Vance. No, Abigail Reed, the woman he was supposed to marry. She was not the blushing, rounded girl the advertisement might have implied. Lean and sharp, angled with pale skin that looked like it had not seen proper sunlight in years. Her hair tucked severely beneath her bonnet was the color of dried wheat. But it was her eyes that stopped Nathan cold. Blue, cold and flat. They moved over the crowd not with curiosity, but with the rapid calculating assessment of an animal looking for a trap. She saw him, saw the way he stood apart from the others, holding his hat like a shield. She walked toward him, her movement smooth and contained like water flowing downhill, inevitable and unhurried. Nathan swallowed hard and stepped forward. His voice came out rougher than he intended, then broke on the second word like he was a boy again, not a man of 26. Miss Reed. He hated himself for it, hated the weakness in his voice, hated that she would hear it and know immediately what kind of man she had traveled 1,000 miles to marry. She stopped 3 feet from him, did not smile, set her trunk down with care, and folded her hands over her Bible. When she spoke, her voice was low and devoid of any warmth. It was a voice that expected nothing good from the world and had been proven right too many times. Mr. Bridger. Not a question, a statement of fact. Yes, ma'am, Nathan Bridger. I trust the journey was... He trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. Long, she said. It's over. That's enough. Nathan reached for her trunk. Let me... She flinched. The movement was small but unmistakable. Her hand darted out to intercept his, and for 1 second her cold, dry fingers brushed against his wrist. Then she pulled back, clutching her hand against her chest like he had burned her. I can manage my own things. Her voice came out sharp. Then she smoothed it, pulling on a practiced, hollow politeness like a well-worn coat. It is not heavy, but thank you. Nathan stepped back, giving her space, giving her air. His face burned hotter than before. I would not hear of it, ma'am. It is the gentlemanly thing. She looked at him then, really looked. Her eyes searched his face, moving quickly, cataloging. She was looking for the anger that usually followed when a woman refused a man, looking for the tightening of the jaw, the narrowing of the eyes, the first signs of violence that she had learned to read the way sailors read weather. What she found was blushing, terrified confusion. Something like bewilderment crossed her face there and gone in an instant. She stepped back and nodded once, a short, decisive movement. Very well. Nathan hoisted the trunk onto his shoulder. It was light, heartbreakingly light. Everything she owned in the world fit in a box a child could carry. The knowledge settled into his chest like a stone dropping into deep water. This way, he murmured. And so began the strangest journey two broken people had ever taken together. They had to walk the length of the platform to reach the hitching post where Nathan's wagon waited. It was a walk that felt like a march to the gallows. The town of Millstone had noticed the new arrival. Conversations on the boardwalks died away. Heads turned. The silence was thick, broken only by the wind rattling the loose boards of the station house. Mrs. Harlow, a pillar of the Methodist Church and the town's self-appointed moral judge, came out of the mercantile just as they passed. She stopped. Her eyes narrowed as they swept over Abigail's gray dress and travel-stained hem. The old woman sniffed loud and distinct, a sound of pure disdain. Then she turned her back with theatrical precision, pulling her shawl tight like she needed protection from some kind of disease. Abigail did not flinch. She kept her chin high and her eyes fixed on the horizon. But Nathan saw her knuckles turn white where she gripped that Bible. She had been on the ground for less than 5 minutes, and she already knew her place in this town. The mail-order woman, a creature considered 1 step above a prostitute and 3 steps below a decent wife. As they passed the saloon, the door swung open. Wade Cutler and his drinking companion had moved from the store to get themselves some liquid courage. Wade stood in the doorway, thumbs hooked in his belt, a grin splitting his weathered face. Well now, his voice carried across the street, slurring slightly with early afternoon whiskey. Looks like the package arrived intact. Nathan, did you check her teeth? I hear they send the old ones out west when they cannot work the cities anymore. Laughter rippled from the shadows of the porch. 2 more men Nathan recognized from the cattle yards. All of them drunk or getting there. All of them finding this hilarious. Nathan froze. Heat flooded his neck and burned all the way to his ears. The trunk on his shoulder seemed to grow heavier. His free hand clenched into a fist at his side. He should say something. A real man would drop the trunk and plant a fist in Wade's face. A real man would defend his wife's honor. His father would have. His father would have left Wade bleeding in the dirt. But Nathan Bridger had never been a fighter. He was the boy who patched up birds with broken wings. The man who apologized when someone else stepped on his boot. The violence that came so natural to other men terrified him. Not because he could not match it physically, he was stronger than Wade by a good margin, but because he simply did not understand the language of it, did not understand how men could hurt each other and then shake hands and drink together an hour later. So he stood there, mouth opening and closing, paralyzed by the shame of his own inaction. It was Abigail who moved. She stopped walking, turned her head slowly to look at Wade. She did not speak, did not scowl, simply looked at him with those flat, dead eyes, an expression of such utter bored indifference that it sucked all the oxygen out of his taunt. It was the look of a woman who had heard every insult a man could invent, who had cataloged them all and filed them away and found this particular one lacking in originality, found it in fact beneath notice. Wade's smile faltered. He shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable under that gaze, spat on the ground and retreated back into the saloon without another word. Abigail turned back to Nathan. "Is the wagon for Mr. Bridger?" Her voice was steady, neutral, as if nothing had happened. "No," Nathan whispered, "just here." But as they walked the last few yards to the hitching post, Nathan's eyes caught something that made his stomach clench. Standing in the shadow of the water tower, separate from everyone else, was a man. He wore a long duster coat and a hat pulled low over his face. He had not boarded the train, had not greeted anyone. He just stood there, rolling a cigarette with slow, methodical movements, watching. When Abigail had appeared on the platform, the man had stopped rolling his cigarette. He had looked directly at her, had not smiled, had not moved, just watched with a calm, predatory patience that made the hair on the back of Nathan's neck stand up. And then as Nathan and Abigail walked away toward the wagon, the man turned, walked toward the telegraph office with the same unhurried stride. Nathan said nothing, loaded Abigail's trunk into the wagon bed, helped her up onto the bench seat with a hand she accepted reluctantly, climbed up beside her and took the reins. The horse, a bay mare named Jasper he had bought 4 years ago for $85, nickered softly and started forward at the touch of the reins. The wagon creaked as it rolled wheels, finding the ruts of the main road leading south out of town. Nathan did not look back, but the image of that man stayed with him, filed away, a splinter of worry he could not quite extract. The ride to the homestead took 2 hours. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon wheels, the rhythmic thud of Jasper's hooves, and the wind hissing through the dry grass. The landscape was overwhelming in its emptiness. To the north, storm clouds were gathering like dark bruises against the sky. The light was failing, turning the world into a gray etching of sagebrush and dust. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. Beautiful like a knife edge. Abigail sat with her spine rigid, never leaning back against the bench. Her eyes never stopped moving. She watched the horizon, the gullies, the distant shapes of cattle grazing. She scanned the land like she expected an ambush at any moment. Nathan cleared his throat. The sound startled them both. "It gets cold at night," he said. His voice sounded too loud in the vast silence. "There is a buffalo robe in the back if you are chilled." "I am fine." A pause, then softer. "Is it always this open?" "Yes, ma'am. There is not a fence for 50 miles to the south, just grass and scow." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was almost too low to hear it over the wind. "It is a good place to hide." Hide, she tightened her grip on the Bible in her lap. "To be alone. That is what I meant. It is a quiet place. It is that," Nathan agreed. "Lonesome, some say. Loneliness is quiet." Abigail's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "Noise is worse." They turned off the main trail onto a rutted track that led toward a small rise near a creek. The house sat there stark against the twilight. A humble structure, half sod, half timber, with a roof that needed new tar paper and a porch that was barely framed out. Nathan felt the need to apologize, clawing up his throat. "It is not much. I have been meaning to finish the siding on the south wall, and the floor inside is just packed earth in the kitchen, though I laid planks in the bedroom." He stumbled over that word. Bedroom. It hung between them, heavy with suggestion and expectation and fear. Abigail stared at the little house. It looked small and fragile against the darkening sky, but there was smoke curling from the chimney. He must have banked the fire before leaving. "It has a door," she said, "and a lock." Nathan's words came quickly, eager to reassure. "A sturdy crossbar. I made it myself out of oak." "Good." That single word carried more weight than any thank you could have. Inside the cabin was clean. Surprisingly so. The main room served as kitchen and living area with a cast iron stove radiating dying heat. A table with two chairs sat in the center. To the right was a door that led to the only other room. Nathan lit the kerosene lamp and golden light pushed back the shadows. The sparse reality of his life was laid bare. A single shelf of books, a tin of coffee nearly empty, a calendar from the feed store. No photographs, no decorations, nothing soft or beautiful or unnecessary. I have stew on, Nathan said, moving to the stove. Just needs heating. I can do that. Abigail moved quickly as if eager to establish her usefulness. That is part of the bargain. You have had a long journey, ma'am. Please, sit. She hesitated, then sat on the edge of one of the chairs, perched like a bird ready to take flight at the first sign of danger. Nathan ladled stew into two bowls. His hands shook slightly, making the ladle clink against the iron pot, but he set the bowl before her with a kind of reverence that was almost painful to witness. They ate in silence. The wind rattled the door on its hinges. Every time a coyote howled in the distance, Abigail's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. When the meal was finished, the silence stretched thin as wire. There was nothing left to do. The plates were cleared. The fire was banked. The clock on the mantel ticked loud in the quiet, and the question neither of them wanted to face hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Nathan stood up from the table. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair, trying to find words that would not come. I expect you will be wanting to rest. Abigail rose too. Her face had gone pale in the lamplight, smooth as a mask. Something flickered in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or resignation. Yes. The bedroom is through there. I brought your trunk in already. Abigail walked to the door and opened it. She stood there looking at the bed. It was a sturdy frame covered in a patchwork quilt with two pillows resting side by side. It was the only bed in the house. She turned to face him. The calm she had worn like armor all day was starting to crack. Her chest rose and fell too fast. She looked at the door, then at him, then back at the bed. She was calculating. Distances, the weight of him, the likelihood of survival. Mr. Bridger. Her voice was steady but brittle as dry glass. We should speak of the arrangements before... She could not finish the sentence. Nathan stood by the table, hands hanging useless at his sides. Arrangements. The marriage. I am your wife now. I signed the papers at the office in Cheyenne before the last leg of the trip, just as the proxy arrangement required. I understand the duties that come with that. Duties. The words sounded strange in his mouth. Abigail began to unbutton the cuffs of her gray dress. Her fingers moved with mechanical efficiency. There was no seduction in it. It was the motion of someone preparing for an unpleasant but necessary task. I am not a woman who plays games, Nathan. His first name in her mouth was startling, intimate and wrong at the same time. I prefer to know the rules of the house right from the start. I cook, I clean, I mend, and at night, she paused, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made his blood run cold. I need to know. Her voice trembled just slightly. Can you make me come? The question hit the room like a gunshot. Nathan blinked. The air seemed to leave his lungs all at once. He stared at her, his mind reeling, trying to make sense of what she had just asked. He had expected her to ask for water, for privacy, for maybe time to pray. What Abigail took a step toward him. Her expression was intense and searching. She was not asking out of desire. She was asking the way a soldier asks how many rounds the enemy has in his rifle. She needed to know the nature of the weapon pointed at her. Needed to know if he would demand performance. If he expected her to fake pleasure to stroke his vanity, or if he intended to use her body with a skill that might become its own kind of trap. Can you, she pressed, because if you cannot, I need to know. If you expect me to pretend, I need to know if I am supposed to lie to you, or if you simply take what you are owed and then sleep. Nathan felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold as the wind outside. He looked at this woman, this stranger with the haunted eyes, and felt a crushing wave of inadequacy wash over him. He was 26 years old. He lived on the edge of the civilized world, and he had never so much as kissed a woman. He looked down at his boots, unable to meet her gaze. The shame was a hot, bitter taste in his mouth. I do not know how, he whispered. The silence that followed was absolute. I do not know how. Nathan's voice cracked. He forced himself to look up, expecting to see disgust on her face, expecting her to laugh the way Wade laughed, expecting her to realize she had sold herself to a man who was not even a real man at all. I have never. I am a virgin, ma'am. He braced himself for ridicule, but it did not come. Abigail stared at him. Her hands stopped moving on her buttons. Her eyes went wide, not with mockery, with shock. And then slowly, so slowly, the tension in her shoulders collapsed. She let out a long, ragged breath that sounded almost like a sob. It was relief. You have never, she asked softly. No, ma'am. Nathan was miserable with shame now. I kept to myself mostly. My mother raised me strict. And then, well, the brothel in town never seemed right, and I never had a sweetheart, never knew how to talk to women proper. Abigail closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, the cold calculation was gone. In its place was a tentative, confused wonder. A man who does not know, she said, testing the words like they might shatter. A man who has no history of taking. You do not know how. I am sorry. Nathan hung his head. I know a wife expects her husband to be experienced. I know I am not what you bargained for. No, her voice came quick and fierce. No. She stepped one back and pulled her cuffs closed again, covering the skin she had started to reveal. No, Nathan, that is good. Good, good. Her voice gained a fraction of strength. It means we can wait. It means you do not have habits. It means you do not require things from me tonight. She looked at him with new intensity. I do not want to be forced, Nathan. I do not want to be used like a tool. If you do not know how, then we can simply sleep. Nathan nodded so fast his neck hurt. Yes, ma'am. I would never force you. To be honest, I scarcely know how to touch a woman without trembling. Abigail looked at his hands, those large, scarred hands that were currently twisting the fabric of his trousers. She saw the truth in him. He was terrified. Of her. We agree then, she said. No demands, no lies, we sleep. And if the time comes where we must change that arrangement, we discuss it first, like partners. I swear it, Nathan said, on my mother's Bible. Abigail nodded once. Then she walked into the bedroom carrying her trunk. Nathan followed but stopped at the doorway. I can sleep in the barn, he offered, or on the floor by the stove. I do not mind. No, Abigail looked at the bed with its two pillows. The town talks, Nathan. If you sleep in the barn every night, they will know something is wrong. They will think I am diseased or that you are weak. We must look like a real marriage to the outside world. She pointed to the bed. It is large enough. You stay on your side. I stay on mine. Yes, ma'am. They prepared for bed in separate corners of the room, turning their backs to each other to undress down to their undergarments. Nathan blew out the lamp, and the room plunged into darkness, so complete he could not see his hand in front of his face. The wind picked up outside, screaming around the corners of the house like a living thing trying to get in. Nathan lay on the far left edge of the mattress. His body was rigid as a board. He was terrified that even his breathing might somehow offend her. He could feel the warmth of her body just a foot away, but he did not move, did not dare. Abigail lay on her back, staring up at the ceiling. She could not see. She was safe, for tonight at least. The man beside her was a boy in a man's body, frightened and gentle. But as she lay there, her mind drifted back to something she had tried to push away the moment she stepped off the train. She had been scanning the crowd for her husband, but her eyes had caught something else entirely. Standing in the shadow of the water tower, separate from everyone else, had been a man. He wore a long duster coat and a hat pulled low over his face. He had not boarded the train, had not greeted anyone. He just stood there, rolling a cigarette, watching passengers step onto the platform. When Abigail had appeared, the man stopped rolling his cigarette. He looked directly at her. He did not smile, did not move, just watched with calm, predatory patience. And then, as she walked away with Nathan, she saw the man turn and walk toward the telegraph office. Abigail squeezed her eyes shut now in the darkness of the bedroom. It was just paranoia. It had to be. It was the ghost of the life she had fled. Her former owner, the man she refused to name even in her own thoughts, was 1,000 miles away in St. Louis. He could not have found her this fast. He could not know where she was, but the fear curled in her gut anyway. Cold and sharp as a blade. Outside, a coyote howled, a long, wavering note that sounded like a woman screaming. The wind rattled the boards of the house, testing the strength of the nails, looking for a way inside. In the darkness, two strangers lay in the same bed. They were separated by a foot of cold quilt and a lifetime of damage. Both of them were afraid. Both of them were hoping that morning would bring some kind of mercy, though the West was not a place known for granting any. "Good night, Nathan," Abigail whispered into the dark. "Good night, Abigail," he whispered back. Neither of them slept for a long time. November settled over the Wyoming plains like a heavy gray blanket, suffocating in its cold. The wind found every gap in the cabin logs and whistled a high, lonely tune that grated on the nerves day and night. But for Nathan and Abigail, the days became a rhythm of survival that left little room for awkwardness. The land demanded labor. It did not care one bit about their strange arrangement. Morning arrived before the sun. The first gray light would seep through the gaps in the shutters, cold and thin as water. Nathan would rise from the buffalo robe he had dragged to the floor that first night, leaving the bed entirely to Abigail, despite her quiet protests. He would move in the darkness, feeling his way to the stove by memory and long practice. The ritual was always the same. Strike a match, the sulfur flare bright enough to hurt the eyes in the pre-dawn gloom. Open the firebox. Coax the banked coals back to life with kindling and breath. Feed in larger pieces of wood once the flames caught. Close the door and adjust the damper. The stove would tick and pop as the iron expanded with heat. Then to the water bucket. A skin of ice would have formed overnight, sometimes thick enough that Nathan had to break it with the handle of the ladle. The sound would crack through the cabin like a gunshot, and he would wince, knowing it would wake Abigail if she was not already awake. But she always was. By the time Nathan had his boots laced and his coat buttoned, Abigail would emerge from the bedroom already dressed in the same gray wool dress, or the one other she owned, a faded blue calico that had been mended so many times the patches had patches. Her hair would be braided and pinned with the severe efficiency of a woman who had learned not to waste time on vanity. She never spoke in those first moments, just moved to the stove and began preparing breakfast. Cornmeal mush most mornings, sometimes eggs if the hens were laying, rarely bacon from the small supply Nathan had laid in before winter. He would head out to the barn while she cooked. The cold would hit him like a wall when he opened the door. His breath would plume white in the darkness. The barn was 20 yards from the house, but in a blizzard it might as well have been 20 miles. Men had frozen to death walking from house to outhouse in weather like this. Nathan had strung a rope between the cabin and the barn door after the first heavy snow, a lifeline in whiteout conditions. Inside the barn it smelled of hay and horse and the earthy warmth of large animals. 3 stalls. Jasper the bay mare, an older sorrel gelding named Red that Nathan used for heavy hauling, and a milk cow named Bessie, her breath steaming in the cold air, her udder full and uncomfortable. Nathan would milk Bessie first. The work was meditative, the rhythmic squeeze and release, the hiss of milk hitting the bottom of the tin pail, then the softer sound as the level rose. Bessie would shift her weight and occasionally turn her large brown eyes to look at him with what seemed like patient tolerance. Then he would fork hay to all 3 animals, check their water, break the ice if needed, run his hands over their legs and bellies, checking for injury or illness. These animals were not pets. They were survival. If they died, he and Abigail might not make it through the winter. By the time he returned to the cabin, breakfast would be on the table. They would eat in silence or near silence, the scrape of spoons on tin plates, the only conversation. And then the work would begin. The work never ended. There was always something that needed doing, and winter made every task twice as hard and 3 times as important. A broken fence line could mean lost cattle. A leaking roof could mean pneumonia. A depleted woodpile could mean freezing to death in your own bed. On the 3rd day, Nathan was working on the fence line that marked the southern boundary of his claim. 160 acres, a quarter section, purchased from the government for $1.25 per acre under the Homestead Act, with the promise that he would improve the land and live on it for 5 years. 3 years in, he was still working on the improvements. The fence was barbed wire strung between posts he had cut and set himself. Simple, brutal, effective. But the winter freeze and thaw cycle played hell with it. Posts heaved out of the ground. Wire contracted and snapped in the cold. Cattle dumb as rocks and twice as stubborn would push against it, looking for better grazing. Nathan was wrestling with a heavy roll of new wire when Abigail appeared beside him. He had not heard her approach over the wind. She wore his old work coat several sizes too large and a pair of leather gloves he had given her. She reached for the roll of wire. Nathan's hands fluttered uselessly. "No, Abigail, that is too heavy. I can manage. Please go back inside where it is warm." Abigail did not drop the wire. She lifted it, her face flushing with exertion, her breath coming in white puffs. The roll probably weighed 40 pounds. She looked at him with an expression he was learning to recognize. Determination edged with something harder. Defiance, maybe. "I am not a China doll, Nathan, and I am not a guest in this house. If I do not work, I do not eat. That is the way the world works." She marched past him, her boots crunching on the frost, hardened ground, carrying the wire toward the fence line. Nathan watched her go, a mixture of shame and admiration warring in his chest. He was used to the women of town. Fragile things, or at least pretending to be fragile. Women who expected men to shield them from every hardship. Women who would have fainted at the thought of manual labor. Abigail attacked work with grim efficiency. She held the fence post steady while he hammered it into the half-frozen ground, his arms aching with each blow. She twisted wire with gloved hands, not flinching when a barb caught her sleeve and tore it. When he tried to apologize, she just looked at the torn fabric and shrugged. "I can mend it." She was nothing like what he had expected. And slowly, day by day, something began to change between them. The intimacy grew not from grand gestures, but from the quiet, unavoidable friction of living together in a small space. It happened in moments neither of them planned. It happened when the stove handle broke. Nathan was moving the heavy iron lid, trying to add more wood to the firebox, when the rusted handle snapped clean off. The lid fell, and his hand came down on the scorching metal. He hissed in pain and jerked back, the instinct to hide his weakness kicking in immediately. To retreat to some corner and nurse the burn alone the way he always had. But Abigail was already there. Before he could step away, she took his hand in hers without asking permission. Her fingers were cool and firm as she led him to the wash basin. She packed snow from the windowsill against the angry red welt on his palm, holding it there despite his protests. Then she dried his hand with a clean cloth, her touch methodical but gentle. Nathan watched the top of her head as she worked. A stray lock of wheat-colored hair had fallen over her brow. She frowned in concentration, her lips pressed together in a thin line. He realized with a jolt that made his breath catch that no one had touched him with the specific purpose of healing since he was a small child in his mother's care. "Thank you," he managed. She did not look up. "It will blister. Keep it clean." It happened again one evening when Nathan came in from the barn to find Abigail struggling to mend one of his work shirts. The fabric was thick canvas meant to withstand the abuse of ranch work. Her needle kept getting stuck in the tough weave. She was frowning hard, biting her lower lip in concentration, making small, frustrated noises in the back of her throat. "Here," Nathan spoke before he could remember to be shy. "Let me show you." He took the shirt from her hands, careful not to touch her fingers, sat down in the chair next to hers. "You have to twist the needle as you push, like this." He demonstrated, his large hands surprisingly deft with the fine work. "See, the twist helps it slide through." She watched, her eyes tracking the movement of his hands. Then she tried it herself on a different section of the shirt. The needle pushed through smoothly this time. "Better," Nathan said. They sat there together by the lamplight, heads bent over the mending, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used, bought with the egg money from the 4 hens Nathan kept. Close enough that when she shifted in her chair, her shoulder brushed against his. Neither of them mentioned how close they were sitting, but neither of them moved away. The work continued. Days blurred together in a haze of cold and exhaustion and small victories. They pumped water together from the well, a 2-person job that required coordination. One to work the pump handle, the other to position the heavy oak buckets. Nathan learned that Abigail was stronger than she looked. Abigail learned that Nathan would never take a bucket from her hands without asking first. They mucked out the barn together. They hauled firewood from the small grove of cottonwoods down by the creek, now frozen solid. They prepared meals and cleaned up after. They maintained the equipment and the animals and the endless, thankless infrastructure that stood between them and death. And somewhere in all that work, the fear began to ease. Not gone, never gone, but easing. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in the second week of November. The sky was the color of old pewter threatening snow, but not yet delivering. Nathan was in the yard trying to coax old Jasper into pulling the wagon down to the creek for water. Jasper had decided with the inscrutable logic of mules everywhere that he had worked enough for one lifetime. Instead of pulling, he simply sat down in the mud of the yard and refused to acknowledge that the universe existed. Nathan pushed. He pulled. He pleaded with the stubborn animal in a voice that grew increasingly desperate. "Come on, you ornery son of a... Jasper, please. It is just down to the creek. You have done it 100 times." Jasper chewed a mouthful of dry grass and blinked slowly, utterly unmoved by appeals to reason or past performance. Nathan tried the carrot, held out a withered apple from the root cellar. Jasper sniffed it, decided it was beneath his dignity, and returned to chewing grass. Nathan tried the stick, picked up a length of willow branch and slapped it against his own thigh to make a threatening sound. Jasper's ears swiveled toward the noise, then swiveled away again, profoundly unimpressed. "I will turn you into glue," Nathan said, hearing the desperation in his own voice. "I will sell you to the coyotes. I will—" He threw his hat in the mud and let out a groan of pure frustration. His hands went to his hair, gripping hard, the picture of a man at the absolute end of his patience. From the porch came a sound that stopped him cold. It was rusty and creaking like a gate that had not been opened in years, like hinges that had rusted shut and were now being forced apart. It took Nathan a full second to recognize it for what it was: laughter. He turned around. Abigail was standing on the porch, one hand pressed over her mouth, but her shoulders were shaking. It was not some polite little titter meant to spare his feelings. It was a real belly-deep laugh at the sheer absurdity of watching a grown man argue philosophy with a mule. The sound of it hit Nathan like a physical force. He looked at her, looked at Jasper, still sitting in the mud with a piece of grass sticking out of his mouth like a cigarette, looked at his own hat lying in a puddle, and something bubbled up in his own throat. A chuckle at first, then a laugh. Then he was laughing too, bent over with his hands on his knees, laughing until his sides ached and tears streamed down his face. Abigail came down off the porch, still laughing, and for a moment they stood there in the cold wind, two people who had been carrying unbearable weights, laughing at a mole who simply did not give a damn. When the laughter finally subsided, Nathan wiped his eyes and looked at Abigail. Really looked. Her eyes were lit up in a way he had never seen before. They were not cold anymore. They were just blue, beautiful and alive, and human. "We should probably get that water," she said, still smiling. "Probably," Nathan agreed. Jasper, sensing that the drama was over, stood up and shook himself like a dog. Mud flew everywhere. He walked calmly to the front of the wagon and waited as if he had been ready all along, and it was Nathan who had been wasting time. They looked at each other and started laughing again. But if the homestead was slowly becoming a refuge, the town of Millstone remained hostile territory. They needed supplies: flour and coffee and salt, the staples that kept body and soul together through a Wyoming winter. Nathan put off the trip for as long as he could, but eventually there was no choice. They rode into town on a Saturday in late November. The sky was clear for once, a hard blue that hurt to look at. The temperature had climbed all the way to freezing, which felt almost warm after days of bitter cold. As they walked down the boardwalk toward the general store, Nathan could feel eyes tracking them like gun sights. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Women turned away. Men stared with open hostility, or worse, with that particular kind of leering speculation that made Nathan's fists clench. He held out his arm stiffly and Abigail took it. Her grip was tight on his sleeve, fingers digging in hard enough that he could feel them through the fabric of his coat. They passed the church first. Reverend Caldwell stood on the steps shaking hands with his parishioners as they departed from the morning service. The Reverend was a tall, gaunt man with a face like a hatchet and eyes that burned with the fervor of absolute certainty. He preached hellfire and offered very little grace to go with it. When he spotted Nathan and Abigail, his welcoming smile vanished like snow on a hot stove. He stepped down from the church steps and moved to intercept them on the boardwalk. "Mr. Bridger," His voice carried pitch to reach every ear on the street. Nathan stopped his jaw tight. "Reverend, we missed you at service last Sunday." The Reverend's tone dripped with false concern, sweet as poison honey, though perhaps it is for the best. A man must have a clean house before he invites the Lord inside it. There is much repenting to be done in this world, especially for those who buy their salvation or their company from a catalog. The women standing near the Reverend turned their backs in perfect unison, a wall of bonnets and wool shawls, a coordinated snubbing executed with the precision of a military maneuver. Nathan felt Abigail flinch beside him. Something hot flared in his chest, a rare spark of anger that surprised even him. "My wife is a Christian woman, Reverend." His voice trembled, but it was loud enough to carry back to every person who had just turned away. "And my house is plenty clean." Reverend Caldwell raised one eyebrow, his expression a masterpiece of condescension. "The Lord knows the heart, Mr. Bridger, and he knows the history." Nathan grabbed Abigail's arm, not roughly but firmly, and hurried her away before he could do something foolish. Something his father would have done. Something that would end with blood on the boardwalk and Nathan in a jail cell. They went to the Mercantile. Samuel Vickers, the proprietor, took their order with stony silence. His eyes would not meet theirs. He weighed out the flour with hands that shook slightly, measured the coffee beans with exaggerated care, slammed the tins on the counter with unnecessary force, making Abigail jump each time. "That will be $4.30, he said to the air above Nathan's head. Nathan counted out the coins from his rapidly dwindling supply. Each one felt like a piece of his future being traded away. $4.30 represented weeks of work, represented the difference between comfort and starvation. He pushed the coins across the counter. Vickers swept them into his cash box without counting them, as if the money itself might be contaminated. By the time they reached the wagon, Nathan was shaking with suppressed rage and humiliation. He helped Abigail up onto the bench seat, his movements jerky with barely controlled emotion, climbed up beside her and took the reins. "I am sorry," he whispered. His voice was rough, thick with shame. "I'm so sorry." Abigail looked straight ahead at the road out of town, at the open prairie beyond where no one could judge them or whisper about them or make them feel less than human. "It is not your fault," she said. Her voice was steady, but he heard the hurt underneath. "They are small people with swollen minds. Let us just go home." Home, she had called it home. That single word settled into Nathan's chest, warm and bright against the cold. She had called this place, this life they were building together out of desperation and loneliness and fear. She had called it home. He clicked his tongue and shook the reins. Jasper started forward, eager to leave town behind. As they rolled down the main street toward the open country, Nathan saw Mrs. Harlow standing outside the dry goods store. She was talking to 3 other women, all of them pillars of the church, all of them watching Nathan and Abigail with expressions of pure disgust. Mrs. Harlow said something and the other women nodded. One of them made a gesture as if physically pushing something away. Another crossed her arms over her chest in a posture of absolute rejection. Nathan felt his stomach drop. This was not just gossip. This was organization. This was the respectable women of Millstone drawing a line and placing Abigail firmly on the wrong side of it. "They are forming ranks," Abigail said quietly. She had seen it too. "Like an army." "They cannot hurt us," Nathan said, but even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Abigail said nothing, but her hand found his on the bench between them and squeezed once hard before letting go. That night, the wind howled louder than usual outside the cabin. The fire was dying down, casting long, dancing shadows on the log walls. Abigail sat in the rocking chair Nathan had made from cottonwood, staring into the embers. Nathan was by the door, oiling his boots with neat's foot oil, working the leather to keep it supple in the cold. The silence between them had changed over the weeks. It was no longer the tense, frightened silence of that first night. It was something more companionable. The silence of 2 people who had learned to exist in the same space without constantly preparing for attack. But tonight, something felt different, heavier. "Nathan," Abigail said quietly. He looked up from his boots. "Yeah." She did not turn from the fire. Her hands were folded in her lap, gripping each other tightly. "Why are you like this?" Nathan blinked, confused. "Like what?" She gestured at him with one hand, a frustrated searching movement. You are strong enough to build this house with your own two hands. You work until your palms bleed, but you act as if you have no right to take up space in the world. You say you are a virgin, but I know religious men. They are usually the cruelest of all. So what is it? What made you this way? Nathan set down the boot he was holding. He wiped his hands slowly on a rag, taking his time the way he did when he needed to think, when he needed to decide how much truth to tell. It is not religion, he admitted softly. Not mostly, anyway. The fire popped. A log settled with a shower of sparks. My father was a hard man. The words came slowly, dredged up from a place Nathan usually kept locked tight. Not to me for the most part, but to my mother. He believed being a man meant taking what you wanted without asking. He used to say that the land and the woman were the same. You had to break them both until they yielded to you. Nathan swallowed. The lump in his throat felt like it might choke him. I was 8 years old when I saw him hit her. Not for the first time, but the first time I really understood what I was seeing. She had smiled at the traveling preacher during Sunday service. Just smiled. A simple kindness to a stranger. And my father, he took her by the arm when we got home, dragged her into the kitchen. I was under the table playing with my toy soldiers. He could see it still, the way his father's hand had drawn back, the way his mother's head had snapped to the side, the sound like meat hitting a butcher's block. He hit her across the face, knocked her to the floor, and he stood over her and said, "You are mine. A man's wife is his property, like his horse, like his land. You forget that, woman." Nathan's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. I wet myself. I was so scared I could not move, could not make a sound. And my mother, she looked at me under that table. Her lip was bleeding. And you know what she did? She smiled at me, smiled and whispered, "It is all right, Nathan. Papa just loves me too much sometimes." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not caring that Abigail could see. But I saw her eyes. I saw the lie. I saw what love looked like in my father's hands, and I swore that day I would never be him. Never. Abigail had turned in her chair. She was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Not pity, something else. Recognition, maybe. I saw how my mother shrank over the years, Nathan continued. How she stopped singing. How the light went out of her eyes. She died when I was 17. Pneumonia, the doctor said. But I think she died long before that. I think she just finally let her body catch up with her soul. He looked up at Abigail, his eyes wet but steady. Then when I was 18, I went on the cattle drives. I saw what the men did in the towns we passed through. The way they grabbed at women, the way they laughed when a woman said no, like it was the funniest joke they had ever heard. They thought it was their right. Nathan's hands clenched into fists on his knees. I decided then and there that I would rather be alone my whole life than ever be the reason a woman looked at me with fear in her eyes. I never wanted to take. I never wanted to be a thief of somebody else's peace. So I just stayed away from women entirely. And I started to wonder if maybe there was something wrong with me. Maybe I was not really a man at all. The silence that followed was heavy, not empty, heavy with understanding, with recognition. Abigail stood slowly from the rocking chair. She walked to the window and looked out at the blackness of the night, at her own reflection, ghostly in the glass. When she spoke, her voice was flat, devoid of all the emotion Nathan had just shown. I was 16. Nathan went completely still. It was not a catalog that brought me here, Nathan. It was a debt. She traced a crack in the window glass with her finger, following its jagged path. My father owed money to a man in St. Louis, a man named Dalton Graves. My father died before he could pay it back. Consumption took him in 3 weeks. I watched him drown in his own lungs. Her voice did not waver. It was like she was reading from a ledger, stating facts. Graves came to collect 2 days after we buried my father. He said I could work off what was owed. He called it a mow, said I would be working in one of his houses, said it was respectable work, serving drinks and keeping company. She turned to face Nathan. Her jaw was tight, but her eyes were dry. It was not about work. It was ownership. I was put in a house with other girls. We were not allowed to leave. The doors were locked from the outside. The windows had bars. The whole town knew, the police knew. Nobody helped us. They said we were fallen. They said we had chosen it. Nathan wanted to go to her, wanted to wrap his arms around her and promise that no one would ever hurt her again. But he stayed where he was because he understood now that she needed space more than comfort, needed to be believed more than protected. The first year I fought, Abigail's voice gained a fraction of color, a hint of the rage that must have burned in her then. I screamed, I clawed, I tried to run twice. They caught me both times. The second time they tied my hands to the bedposts and left me there for 3 days, until I learned to be still. She wrapped her arms around herself, gripping her own elbows. The second year I cried. I begged, I prayed for God to strike them dead or strike me dead. I did not care which. Her voice dropped even lower. By the third year I stopped crying. I stopped praying. I just left. Every time a man touched me, I would float up to the corner of the ceiling and watch it happen to someone else. Some girl who looked like me but was not me. It was easy after a while, easier than being there. She looked at Nathan, and for the first time since she had started speaking, her voice broke. By the 5th year, I could not remember what it felt like to be Abigail Reed. I was just the quiet one, the blonde one, just thing they used and put back in its place when they were done. She took a shuddering breath. You are afraid of taking Nathan. I am afraid of being erased. Every time a man touched me beat against my will, I became less real. I became just an object, a piece of furniture for them to use. I came out here because I wanted to be a person again, even if it was just being a wife on paper. I wanted to exist. Nathan rose to his feet. Every fiber of his being wanted to cross the room to hold her, to find Dalton Graves in St. Louis and tear him apart with his bare hands. But he stayed where he was, giving her the space she needed. You are real, Abigail. His voice was fierce, burning with an intensity that surprised them both. You are the realest thing in this whole territory, and I swear to you on everything I have, I will never let anyone make you feel like a thing again. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for the lie, for the trap, for the moment when the mask would slip and she would see the monster underneath. She did not find one. Something in her expression softened. Not much, but enough. I believe you, she whispered. And for the first time since she had arrived, Nathan saw the ghost of the girl she must have been before St. Louis, before Graves, before the world taught her that kindness was just another word for weakness. They stood there in the firelight, two broken people who had found each other by accident, and the silence between them was no longer heavy with fear. It was heavy with something else, something that might, with time and care, grow into trust. Outside, the wind continued to scream, but inside the cabin for the first time, the cold could not quite reach them. The change happened 2 nights later. The air in the cabin had shifted after their confessions. The poison of secrecy had drained away, leaving something cleaner in its place. They moved around each other with a new awareness now, a new tenderness. It was late. The lamp was out. The darkness so complete that Nathan could not see his own hand in front of his face. He lay on his back on the floor beside the bed, listening to Abigail's breathing just above him. It was uneven. She was awake. Nathan, she whispered into the dark. Yes. There was a long pause. Then her voice came again, so small he almost missed it over the wind outside. Can I ask you something? Anything. Another pause. Longer this time. When she spoke, the words came out in a rush, like she had to say them fast or not at all. I want to try. Nathan felt his heart slam against his ribs. Try what? I want to know if it can be different. Her voice was barely audible. I want to know if I can be touched without disappearing. Nathan turned his head even though he could not see her in the darkness. Abigail, I told you, I do not know what I am doing. I could hurt you. I know. She cut him off gently. That is exactly why I am asking you. If you knew how you would have a method, you would have expectations. I want to guide you. I want to be the one in control of what happens. He heard the quilt rustle as she moved. The warmth of her body was suddenly closer, and then he felt her hands searching in the darkness, finding his where it lay on his chest. Give me your hand, she said softly. Nathan lifted his hand. His fingers were trembling like leaves in a storm. She took it in both of hers, holding it carefully as if it were something fragile and dangerous at the same time. She guided it slowly, deliberately, placed his open palm against the side of her waist over her nightgown. Just there, the curve of her hip beneath his hand, the warmth of her skin radiating through the thin cotton. He could feel her heartbeat rapid and strong. Just there, she whispered. Just hold. Do not grab. Do not squeeze. Just hold still. Nathan barely breathed. He focused everything he had on being gentle, on being a wall she could lean against rather than a cage trying to trap her. His palm was rough from work, calloused and scarred. He was terrified it would scrape her, hurt her. Is this all right? His voice came out rough as gravel. Yes. She breathed the word more than spoke it. Now move your hand slowly, up, and if I say stop, you stop, like a statue. I swear it. He moved his hand, a few inches, slow as winter ice melting. He felt the rapid flutter of her heartbeat beneath her ribs, felt the way her breath hitched when his thumb brushed the side of her breast, accidental and fleeting. She was waiting for the grab, the pinch, the sudden violence. It did not come. There was only the large calloused hand of a man who was shaking more than she was. Touch my face, she whispered. Nathan moved his hand slowly to her cheek. In the darkness he had to navigate by feel alone. His fingers found her jaw first, the delicate bone beneath soft skin, then her cheek. It was wet. Did I hurt you? He pulled back instantly, horrified. No. Her voice was fierce. She caught his wrist before he could retreat, holding him there. No, do not stop. It does not hurt. That is why I am crying. It does not hurt at all. She turned her face into his palm and pressed against it. Then she kissed his knuckles one by one, a desperate seeking gesture that broke something open inside him. Nathan felt the shame of his inexperience crack apart and fall away. He was not less than other men. He was not broken. He was not a conqueror. He was a harbor. He used his other hand to stroke her hair, clumsy but reverent. His fingers tangled in the long strands, learning the texture of them, the way they slipped through his fingers like water. Abigail, he whispered her name like a prayer. She made a sound, half sob and half something else. Relief, maybe, or release, and then she was moving closer, closing the distance between them. Her forehead pressed against his chest. Her arms came around him, hesitant at first, then tighter. Nathan held her, wrapped his arms around her rigid frame and held her like she was made of something holy. She wept for a long time. The grief of 5 years poured out of her like water from a broken dam. Abigail cried for the girl she had been, for the years stolen, for all the times she had floated up to that corner of the ceiling and watched them use the shell of her body while her soul hid somewhere safe and small. Nathan held her through it all. He pulled her against his chest and stroked her hair and whispered words that meant nothing and everything. Outside, the wind battered the walls of the house, but inside, for the first time, the cold could not reach them. They did not go further that night. The act of touching and stopping, of asking and answering, was the intimacy they needed. It was the proof that something different was possible. When her tears finally subsided, Abigail's breathing evened out. She fell asleep there in Nathan's arms, her head on his chest. He lay awake for hours after staring up into the darkness, feeling the weight of her trust like gold in his hands. December came with a vengeance. The thaw that had made November almost bearable vanished overnight. The temperature dropped to 10 below zero and stayed there. The creek froze solid, a thick sheet of ice that would not break until spring. The world became a study in white and gray and the brutal, unforgiving cold. But something had shifted between Nathan and Abigail. The formal distance was gone. They talked now, real conversations about everything and nothing. They learned each other's habits and preferences and fears. Abigail learned that Nathan loved to read but was embarrassed by how slowly he did it. His finger would track under the words, his lips moving slightly as he sounded them out. She started reading aloud to him in the evenings while he mended harnesses by the fire. Her voice was soft but clear, and Nathan discovered he could lose himself in the sound of it, in the stories she chose. Adventure tales mostly. Jack London and James Fenimore Cooper. Stories about men who survived against impossible odds. Nathan learned that Abigail had a wicked sense of humor that only emerged when she felt safe. She could deliver a joke so dry that it took him a full minute to realize she was teasing. Him, like the time she told him completely straight-faced that his cornbread was so hard it could be used as a weapon. He had started to apologize before he saw the tiny smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. They learned to work as a team. When Bessie the milk cow fell ill with a winter cough, it was Abigail who mixed a poultice of mustard and warm lard. She spent hours in the drafty barn, rubbing the animal's chest, while Nathan held the lantern and talked to the cow in a low, soothing voice. "You are good at this," Abigail said, glancing up at him. "At what, gentling? You have a gift for it." Nathan felt heat rise in his face. "Animals are easier than people." "Are they?" Abigail returned her attention to Bessie, but there was something in her tone, something that suggested she did not think it was so different after all. But as the weeks passed, Nathan found himself wrestling with a new kind of storm inside his own heart. The proximity was maddening. They lived in one room, they breathed the same air. He watched her brush her hair by the firelight, the strokes long and meditative, and felt his chest ache. He watched her hands kneading bread dough, strong and capable, and had to look away. He wanted her, truly wanted her, not just to touch, but to merge his broken life with hers into something whole. But the desire brought the old fear roaring back sharper than ever. He was a large man with rough hands. He had spent his whole life watching how men like his father used their size to intimidate and control. The thought of his own strength crushing her terrified him. She had been hurt. The fragments of her story haunted him. If he touched her with real desire, would she see him as just another man trying to own her? One evening in late December, the tension broke. They had spent the day hauling firewood from the grove down by the frozen creek. They were both chilled to the bone, their joints aching from the cold. Nathan filled the large copper wash tub in front of the stove. It took an hour to heat enough water to fill it properly. Steam rose in the small room, smelling of sage and lye soap. "You go first," Nathan said, keeping his back turned to give her privacy. "The water will not stay hot for long." He sat at the table, pretending to fix a bridle while he listened to the rustle of her clothes. The splash of water as she stepped in. The long sigh of relief as the heat soaked into her frozen muscles. The sound of water lapping against copper was the loudest thing in the world. "Nathan," she said after a long silence. He froze, a leather strap clutched in his hands. "Yes, my back. The cold has settled into my shoulders, something fierce. I cannot reach." Nathan set down the bridle. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape. He stood and walked slowly to the tub. Abigail was submerged to her chest, her knees drawn up. Her skin was flushed pink from the heat. She leaned forward and rested her forehead on her knees, exposing the long, elegant line of her spine. Nathan picked up the cloth and the bar of lavender soap she had bought with her egg money. His hands shook as he worked up a lather. He touched the cloth to her shoulder blade, and she did not flinch. She leaned into the pressure. "Is that too hard?" he whispered. "No, harder. There is a knot right there." Nathan worked the tension with his thumb, pressing firm circles into the muscle. He finally discarded the cloth entirely. Skin against skin. Her body was soft, impossibly soft compared to the rough calluses of his hands. He learned that she held all her tension at the base of her neck. Learned that she shivered not from cold but from sensation when he brushed the hair away from her nape. Abigail turned her head, resting her cheek on her tenine so she could look at him. Her eyes were dark, the pupils wide in the dim light. "You are shaking." "I am scared," Nathan admitted. "Of what?" "Of hurting you, of being too much. I am not a small man, Abigail. I do not know the gentle way." Abigail reached up with a wet hand. She took hold of his wrist and pulled his hand from her back, brought it to her lips, kissed each of his knuckles slowly, deliberately. "You are the gentlest man I have ever known," she whispered. "And I am not made of glass. I am made of gristle and bone, just like you." She turned fully in the tub, the water sloshed, spilling over the edge onto the floor. She reached up and placed both her hands on his face, cupping his jaw, pulling him down toward her. "Kiss me," she said. Not like a friend. Kiss me like you want to." Nathan made a sound low in his throat, half moan, half prayer. He leaned down and pressed his mouth to hers with desperate, trembling reverence. It was not perfect. Their noses bumped. He did not know where to put his hands and left them hovering awkwardly in the air until Abigail grabbed them and put them firmly on her wet shoulders. But when she sighed into his mouth, a sound of pure wanting, something finally broke free inside Nathan Bridger. He kissed her deeply, explored the shape of her mouth, the warmth of her tongue against his. felt her fingers tangle in his hair and pull him closer. For the first time in his life, he understood that his body was not a threat. It was an instrument of connection. When he finally pulled back, they were both gasping for air, flushed and breathless. "The water is getting cold," Nathan managed to say. Abigail smiled, a true wicked smile that transformed her entire face. "Then you had better help me out." March came. The thaw turned the world into a slush of mud and melting drifts. With the thaw came the realization that they had survived the winter together. Against all odds, against the hostility of the town and the brutal cold and their own damaged hearts, they had survived. But the supplies were running dangerously low. The flour barrel was scraped clean, the coffee tin empty, the salt nearly gone. They hitched up the wagon, the wheels sinking deep into the muck, and made the slow, arduous journey into Millstone. The town had changed over the winter. There were new fences up on the outskirts. A fresh painted sign hung over the bank that had not been there before. Large letters in gold leaf, Blackwood Cattle Company. Nathan felt a prickle of unease crawl up the back of his neck like a spider. They went to the general store first. Samuel Vickers looked nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. He weighed their flour and sugar quickly, his eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. "You folks had best be careful," he muttered, as he wrapped their bacon in brown paper. Nathan counted out the coins from his dwindling supply. $4.80 this time. The prices had gone up. "Why is that, Mr. Vickers?" Vickers lowered his voice to barely a whisper. "Garrison Blackwood is in town. Bought out the livery stable and the freight office over the winter. Says the small claims are inefficient. Says he needs the water access for his cattle herds." Nathan went stiff as a fence post. "My claim has the only year-round creek in the South Valley." Vickers nodded grimly. "I know Nathan, and so does he." Abigail was across the store looking at a bolt of fabric. A pretty blue ribbon had caught her eye. She had not heard the conversation. The bell above the door jingled. The temperature in the store seemed to drop 10 degrees. A man walked in. He was older, perhaps 52 years of age, with a thick shock of silver hair and a coat made of fine buffalo hide. He did not look like any cattleman Nathan had ever seen. He looked like a senator or a railroad baron, a man who had fought his way to the top and intended to stay there. He was flanked by two men. One of them was the stranger Nathan had noticed at the train station months ago, the man with the waxed mustache who had been watching Abigail step off the train. Garrison Blackwood walked with the heavy, assured stride of a man who believes he owns the ground beneath his feet. "Vickers," his voice boomed through the small space. "I need 3 boxes of Havana cigars. Put them on my ledger." "Yes, Mr. Blackwood." Vickers was practically cowering. Garrison turned and his gaze fell on Nathan. He smiled. It was a thin, cruel expression that did not reach his eyes, the smile of a wolf spotting a lone sheep. "Mr. Bridger, I presume. I have heard much about you. The man who sits on the Sweetwater Creek claim." Nathan stepped away from the counter, placing himself between Garrison and Abigail. "Mr. Blackwood, I sent a man to visit you last week, but the roads were impassable with all that snow." Garrison's tone was smooth as oil. "I have a proposition for you, and I am expanding my operation. I am willing to offer you a fair price for your claim, $600 cash." Nathan kept his voice steady, but his hands were clenched at his sides. "That land is worth $2,000 at least, and it is not for sale." Garrison chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound like dead leaves scraping on stone. "Everything is for sale, son. It is just a matter of finding the right currency." His eyes drifted past Nathan and landed on Abigail. She had frozen in place by the fabric bolts. She was staring at the man with the waxed mustache, and her face had gone white as bleached bone. "Ah," Garrison said, his voice dropping to a purr. "And this must be the bride, the import." He took a step toward her. The man with the mustache leaned in and whispered something in Garrison's ear. Garrison's eyebrows rose with interest. "Is that so? Well, it seems we have mutual acquaintances in St. Louis. A Mr. Dalton Graves speaks very highly of your talents, Mrs. Bridger." Abigail did not move. Her face had gone beyond pale. It was gray now, the color of ash. Her eyes glazed over and went somewhere far away. Nathan recognized it instantly. She was not here anymore. She was back in that parlor with the velvet curtains. back in the prison that had held her for 5 years. Garrison reached out. He did not grab her, simply brushed a piece of imaginary lint from her shoulder. A possessive gesture. A test. "You know, Mrs. Bridger," he said softly, "there are unresolved ledgers. A woman who runs away with company property, that is a very serious matter." The touch snapped Abigail back into her body. The feeling of his gloved fingers on her shoulder was a spark thrown into a powder keg. The frozen dissociation shattered into something else entirely. White-hot rage. Abigail's hand moved in a blur. She snatched a pair of heavy fabric shears from the counter beside her. With a sound that was half sob and half snarl, she swung them down with all her strength. The shears slammed into the wooden counter 3 inches from Garrison's hand. They buried themselves deep in the oak with a sound like a thunderclap. The impact sent a jar of penny candy tumbling to the floor, scattering sweets across the boards. Garrison jerked backward, his composure cracking for the first time. The man with the mustache's hand went to the gun on his hip. "Do not touch me." Abigail's voice was unrecognizable, low and guttural and vibrating with something feral and dangerous. "I am not property. I am not a ledger entry. And if you ever put your hands on me again, I will not miss." The man with the mustache drew his gun halfway out of the holster. Nathan moved faster than he had ever moved in his life. He grabbed the man's wrist and twisted it hard, using the strength of years spent wrestling steers. The man cried out in pain and dropped to one knee, his gun clattering to the floor. "We are leaving." Nathan's voice was calm, but his eyes were burning with a fire he had never felt before. He grabbed the sack of flour with one hand and took Abigail's arm gently with the other. "Come, Abigail." They backed out of the store. Garrison stood by the counter, staring at the shears still vibrating where they were embedded in the wood. He was not scared. He looked interested, intrigued even. "You have spirit," he called after them. "I do enjoy breaking spirits. It makes the horse so much more valuable once the breaking is done." They did not go straight to the wagon. Nathan pulled Abigail into the narrow alley between the bank and the assay office. She was shaking violently now, the adrenaline crashing through her system like a runaway train. He took her by the shoulders. "Abigail, look at me." She looked up. Her eyes were wide and wild with terror. He knows about graves. They are going to take me back." "No," Nathan's voice was firm. "No one is taking you anywhere." "But the law, Nathan, the law." "The law here is Blackwood." "Uin," Nathan said bitterly. "The sheriff drinks at Blackwood's saloon. The judge plays cards at Blackwood's table. But that does not mean we are helpless." Abigail was starting to hyperventilate, her breath coming in short, rapid gasps. "We have to run. We have to go to Oregon or California, leave everything behind and start over." Nathan shook his head. "No, that is exactly what he wants. He wants us to run so he can take the water rights without a fight. If we run, we look guilty. If we run, they will hunt us down as fugitives and criminals." "Then what do?" she cried. "We fight." Nathan looked down the street at a small, dusty office above the feed store. A faded sign swung in the wind. "Edmund Pierce, attorney at law, notary public." Pierce is a newcomer to the territory. The rumors say he is a drunk who reads Greek philosophy on his porch. Came west for his health. But more importantly, he is not on Blackwood's payroll. Not yet, anyway. He took Abigail's hand. "Come on. There is someone we need to talk to." They found Edmund Pierce asleep at his desk, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside a towering stack of law books. He was a scarecrow of a man with a hacking cough and ink-stained fingers. When he coughed, Nathan could see flecks of blood on the handkerchief he pressed to his mouth. Nathan slammed his palm on the desk. "Wake up, Mr. Pierce. We have business." Pierce jerked awake and blinked through bleary eyes. He fumbled for his spectacles and peered at them. "Nathan Bridger and the mysterious Mrs. Bridger. To what do I owe this intrusion into my productive afternoon?" They told him everything. Abigail spoke haltingly at first, then with growing strength. She told him about the debt her father had left behind, the contract she had been forced to sign at 16, the nature of the work, the years of captivity, the escape. Pierce listened without interrupting. The cynicism slowly faded from his face as the story unfolded. He poured a small glass of whiskey, but did not drink it. Just turned the glass in his fingers, watching the amber liquid catch the light. "This Blackwood," Pierce said when she had finished, He claims to represent this Graves fellow. He implies it, Nathan said. Says there is a debt still owed. Pierce stood and walked to the window. He looked down at the street where Garrison was just emerging from the bank across the way, flanked by his men. This is not about any debt, Pierce said quietly. It is about the creek. Blackwood has been overgrazing the north pastures for 2 years. He needs water access, or his whole cattle empire dies of thirst next summer. He is using your wife's past as a weapon to steal your future. Abigail's voice was small. Can he do it? Can he legally take me back? Pierce turned to face her. Under the law, it is murky territory. Indentured service contracts have been largely illegal since the war ended, but debt repayment arrangements exist in a gray area. If Blackwood finds a friendly judge willing to interpret that contract as a valid labor agreement, they could issue a warrant for your arrest. Theft of services, they would call it. Abigail's face crumpled, but Pierce continued, a glint of steel entering his watery eyes. However, if the original contract was signed under duress, if it was obtained from a minor without proper legal counsel, if the nature of the work violates the moral statutes of this territory, then the whole thing is void from the beginning. He looked at Abigail intently. You say you signed it after your father died. Did you have any legal representation? No, I was 16 years old and alone. Pierce slapped his hand on one of his law books with unexpected force. Fraud, coercion of a minor. And if we can prove Blackwood is conspiring to enforce an illegal contract for the purpose of land extortion, we have him on federal charges. That means a federal court, not the county court that Blackwood owns. Nathan leaned forward. We need evidence. We need the original contract, Pierce corrected, the one they are holding over your heads. And we need to file a preemptive claim on your water rights. That ties everything up in federal proceedings. He sat down and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. It will cost you. I do not work for free. Nathan reached for his pocket. I have $40. Pierce waved a dismissive hand. Keep your money. I want a side of beef when you slaughter in the fall. But he smiled then, a crooked, dangerous expression. And I want to see the look in Garrison Blackwood's face when I serve him with a federal injunction. I truly despise bullies, Mr. Bridger. The ride home was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than before. This was the silence of soldiers moving into position before a battle. They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. Nathan unhitched the team while Abigail lit the stove inside. When he came through the door, she was standing by the table, her hands flat on the worn wood surface. Nathan went to her. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on top of her head. We are in the thick of it now, he said softly. Yes, she answered. She leaned back against his chest. Abigail. Yeah, when you grabbed those shears in the store, when you nearly stabbed him. Did I scare you? Nathan turned her around gently so he could look into her face. The fear was gone from her eyes. The hesitation was gone too. What remained was something fierce and unbreakable. No, he said honestly. You look like a warrior. I was proud of you. Abigail let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for years. I am not going back, Nathan. I will die first. I will burn this whole territory to the ground before I go back to that life. You will not die, Nathan said, and you will not go back. This is our land. You are my wife, and I will destroy any man who tries to take you from me. It was a vow, quiet and simple, spoken in a kitchen that smelled of cold ash and yesterday's coffee. But it was as binding as anything carved in stone. They ate a simple supper and went to bed early, exhausted from the day. But in the darkness, the intimacy between them was fierce and urgent. There was a desperation in their touching now, a need to remind each other that they were real, that they were here, that they belonged together. Nathan kissed the hollow of her throat. He felt her pulse beating strong and steady against his lips. I love you, Abigail, he whispered. The words felt strange and new in his mouth. I love you too, Nathan, she whispered back. They fell asleep tangled together, limbs heavy with exhaustion, hearts full of fear and hope in equal measure. They were woken 3 hours later by a sound that cut through their dreams like a knife. A rifle shot. Nathan was out of bed before the echo faded. He grabbed his trousers and his Winchester, moving low and fast. Stay down, he hissed to Abigail. He crawled to the window and peered out through a crack in the shutter. The moon was high and full, bathing the landscape in silver light that was almost bright as day. The south pasture fence had been cut. The wire was coiled back and hanging from the gatepost, glinting in the moonlight. And there in the moonlight, he could see a shape. It was not a person. It was Bessie the milk cow. She was dead. Her throat had been cut, and her body had been strung up on the fence like some grotesque scarecrow, her legs dangling, her head lolling at an unnatural angle. On the side of the barn, painted in huge jagged letters with something dark that looked like tar, was a message: pay the debt or lose the land. Nathan gripped the rifle until his knuckles turned white. A cold, deadly calm settled over him like a blanket of fresh snow. The time for being soft was over. He turned to Abigail, who was crouching by the bed, her eyes wide in the moonlight. "What is it?" she whispered. "It has started," Nathan said. He looked back out at the dark hills. Somewhere out there, Blackwood's men were watching. Let them watch, he thought. Let them come. Sheriff Dalton arrived 3 days later carrying a piece of paper, an attachment order from the county court. Judge Holloway had signed it that very morning. "Means there is a dispute regarding title to this land," Dalton explained, not meeting Nathan's eyes. "You are not to sell any stock or move any timber or leave the county until the hearing is resolved." "That order is illegal," Nathan said flatly. "Edmund Pierce is filing an injunction with the federal court." Dalton laughed bitterly. "Pierce is a drunk, Nathan. Judge Holloway does not read filings from drunks." He tossed the paper at Nathan's feet. "Listen, boy, Blackwood eats men like you for breakfast. She is just a woman, a mail-order girl with a spotted past. Is she really worth your land? Is she worth your life?" He nodded toward the cabin where Abigail stood watching from the doorway. "Just send her back to St. Louis. Blackwood says if you hand her over, the whole debt is cleared. He will even give you $500 for your trouble. You can start fresh. Find yourself a nice, clean girl from the church." Nathan stepped forward. The snow crunched loud beneath his boots. "Get off my land, Dalton." Dalton's hand drifted toward his holster. "You threatening an officer of the law? I am telling a trespasser to leave. If you come back here without a federal marshal, I will treat you like any other hired gun coming onto my property uninvited." Dalton stared at him for a long moment. He saw something in Nathan's eyes that had not been there before. The softness was gone. The apologetic boy who used to back down from every confrontation had been burned away, leaving only cold, hard determination. "Have it your way, kid, but do not say I did not warn you." He turned his horse and rode away. That night, someone set fire to the hay shed. Nathan smelled the smoke first, then saw the orange glow through the window. By the time he reached the yard, the entire structure was engulfed in flame. The dry hay went up like gunpowder despite the winter moisture. Flames licked at the sky, casting a grotesque dancing light across the snow. Despite the winter, the heat was intense enough to feel from 50 yards away. "Get the horses!" Abigail screamed from the porch. Nathan ran to the adjacent barn. The heat was intense. Smoke billowed in the rafters. The horses were screaming, kicking at their stalls in terror. He threw open each stall door and slapped the rumps of the panicked animals, driving them out into the safety of the paddock. He managed to drag out the tack trunk and a few tools before the heat became unbearable. But the hay was gone. All of it. He stood in the snow, his face blackened by soot, watching the shed collapse into a pile of glowing embers. Without feed, the horses would starve before the spring grass came in. Without the horses, they could not work the land. It was a death sentence delivered with a match. Abigail appeared beside him. She was staring at the fire with no expression on her face. "They did this." Nathan nodded grimly. He could see the tracks in the snow leading away from the back of the shed. 2 riders. They had come in from the north ridge, lit the fire, and vanished into the darkness. "We need to leave," Abigail said. Her voice was hollow. "He will not stop." Nathan looked at her, at the firelight reflected in her eyes, at the soot on her face and the determination in the set of her jaw. "No," he said, "we are not leaving. Not yet." But Abigail had already made her decision. She waited until Nathan went back into the barn to check on the horses. Then she did the hardest thing she had ever done. She wrote a letter. "My dearest Nathan," she began. Her hand shook so badly the words were barely legible. "The fire was because of me. The cow was because of me. Next time it will be the house and you will be inside it. I cannot let you die for a mistake I made 6 years ago. I am going to town. I will go to Blackwood and tell him I ran away on my own. I will tell him you knew nothing. I will tell him I tricked you into the marriage. He will take me back and leave you alone. Do not come for me. Please, if you love me, let me save you this one time. I love you. You made me real again. Abigail. She left the letter on the table weighted down with the salt shaker. She put on her coat and her boots. She slipped out into the freezing night and started walking through the snow toward town. She made it 3 miles before the cold took her legs out from under her. She collapsed in a snowdrift and started crawling, dragging herself forward inch by inch with the last of her strength. That was how Nathan found her. He had come back inside, seen the letter, and felt his heart stop beating. He did not bother with a saddle. He threw a bridle on the bay mare and galloped bareback into the darkness, following her tracks in the snow. Abigail, he screamed when he saw her. He threw himself off the horse and ran to her. She was blue-white with cold. Ice crystals clung to her eyelashes. She looked up at him with a confused, dreamlike expression. Go back, she slurred. Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely form words. Go back, Nathan. He gathered her into his arms. She felt like a block of ice. You stupid, stubborn woman. He was sobbing now, pulling her against his chest, trying to force his own body heat into her frozen limbs. You think this is saving me. You think I can live without you. Have to pay the debt. There is no debt, Nathan shouted into the wind. I do not need the land. I do not need the horses. I need you. You are my heart, Abigail. If you go, I am dead anyway. He managed to heave her up onto the horse. He climbed up behind her, sandwiching her between his body and the animal's warm neck. Stay awake, he commanded. Talk to me. Tell me about the blue ribbon. Tell me anything. Blue ribbon, she mumbled. Pretty. He turned the horse and raced back toward the cabin. The ride was a blur of terror. Every time her head lolled forward, he shook her and shouted her name. They made it back. He carried her inside and laid her on the rug in front of the stove. He threw every piece of wood they had into the firebox until the cast iron glowed red with heat. He stripped the frozen clothes off her, stripped off his own. He pulled the mattress from the bed and dragged it to the fire. He wrapped them both in every quilt and blanket they owned. He held her skin to skin, shivering violently as the cold slowly leached out of her body and into his. He rubbed her arms, her legs, her back. He kissed her frozen face and prayed harder than he had ever prayed in his life. Please, God, just this. I will never ask for anything else. Just let her live. It took an hour. Slowly, so slowly, the color began to return to her cheeks. She stopped shaking. Her breathing deepened. She opened her eyes. They were clear. Nathan, she croaked. I am here. He was weeping now. I am here. Why did you come for me? Because I am selfish, he whispered, stroking her hair back from her face. Because I cannot be the man I want to be without you. She buried her face against his chest and began to cry. Morning brought a cold, hard clarity. Nathan sat at the table cleaning his rifle. His voice was steady and calm in a way it had never been before. We cannot stay here. He will burn the house next, and we will be inside it. Abigail was wrapped in a blanket, drinking hot water. They had no coffee left. So we run. We go to Oregon, start over with nothing. No. Nathan shook his head. He spread a worn map out on the table. If we run, we are fugitives. Blackwood will send men after us. He will put a bounty on your head. We will spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. He pointed to a spot on the map. We go to Cheyenne. It is 70 miles south through the mountain pass. The territorial capital. That is where the federal district court sits. That is where the United States Marshal has his office. He looked up at her. Judge Holloway is Blackwood's man. Sheriff Dalton is Blackwood's man. But the federal judges in Cheyenne answer to Washington. They are not bought and paid for by some cattle baron. 70 miles, Abigail said quietly. In the snow with horses that have no feed left. We take the strongest horse. We pack light. 4 days, maybe 5. It is suicide. Staying here is suicide, Nathan countered. At least out there we are moving. At least we are fighting. He reached across the table and took her hand. I am done hiding, Abigail. I am done apologizing for existing. I want my life back. I want our life. Abigail looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked out the window at the blackened ruins of the hay shed, at the endless white expanse of prairie stretching to the horizon. She turned back to face her husband. Her jaw was set with determination. "When do we leave?" "Now," Nathan said, "before the snow starts falling again." They packed in near silence. A bag of dried meat, the last of the flour, a cooking pot, the rifle, Abigail's worn Bible. Nathan saddled the bay mare. They turned the other two horses loose, hoping they would find shelter in the canyon on their own. Nathan helped Abigail up into the saddle. He would walk and lead the horse to save the animal's strength. He took one last look at the cabin, the half-finished siding on the south wall, the smoke still curling from the chimney. It was the only real home he had ever known. He turned his back on it. "Ready?" he asked, looking up at Abigail. She gripped the pommel tight. Her eyes were full of fear, but also something fiercer. "Ready." Nathan took the reins. He stepped forward into the deep snow, breaking the trail. They headed south into the teeth of the wind, leaving the safety of everything they knew for a justice that might not even exist. The journey nearly killed them. The pass was choked with drifts 10 feet deep in places. The wind cut through their clothes like knives made of ice. They slept in shallow caves and abandoned line shacks, huddled together for warmth, not daring to light a fire that might give away their position. On the third day, they saw dust on the horizon. Riders, 4 of them moving fast. "Blackwood's men," Nathan said, watching through his spyglass. "They are tracking us." They rode hard into a narrow canyon and hid among the boulders while the pursuers thundered past on the valley floor below. That night, crouched in a shallow cave without a fire, Abigail cleaned the rifle while Nathan kept watch. "They will not stop," she whispered. "They will keep coming." "We are almost there," Nathan said. "One more day." Cheyenne was not a town. It was a machine made of brick and iron and noise. Locomotives screamed in the rail yard. Men in clean linen collars hurried down boardwalks, clutching leather portfolios and checking pocket watches. Nathan and Abigail arrived looking like ghosts. Their horse was gaunt and stumbling. Their faces were raw and windburned. Their clothes were stiff with dirt and ice. But they had made it. They found the federal courthouse, a massive stone building designed to make ordinary people feel small. They navigated a maze of clerks and secretaries and bailiffs, each one a gatekeeper, trying to filter out the desperate. Finally, they were granted an audience with an assistant United States attorney named Percival Black. He was a young man with ink-stained fingers and a perpetually exhausted expression. "My clerk says you have a frantic story about land fraud and illegal contracts," Black said without offering them a seat. "I have exactly 5 minutes. This territory is full of land disputes. What makes yours special?" "It is not just a dispute," Nathan said. "It is a conspiracy." Abigail stepped forward. She placed their documents on the desk. The threatening note, the affidavit Pierce had prepared, her marriage certificate. "It is about slavery, Mr. Black," she said quietly. "Slavery is still alive in this territory, and I am here to prove it." She began to speak. It was the first time she had told the complete story from beginning to end to someone who actually held power. She told him about the debt, the contract, the house in St. Louis, the men who paid for time, the money that only ever went to interest and never touched the principal. She told him about Blackwood's connection to Graves, about how he was using that illegal contract to steal her husband's water rights. Black's bored expression slowly changed as she spoke. By the end, he was leaning forward with his elbows on the desk, completely focused. "And you say Blackwood has been enforcing this contract," Black said slowly, "using it as leverage to acquire federal land claims." "Yes, sir." Black opened a drawer and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. "This office takes a very dim view of peonage, Mr. Bridger, and an even dimmer view of land fraud." He dipped his pen in the inkwell. "I am scheduling a preliminary hearing for tomorrow morning. Judge Abernathy is presiding. He is a hard man, but he despises traffickers." The hearing was packed. Word had spread through Cheyenne like wildfire. Reporters from the Cheyenne Leader filled the front row, pencils poised over notebooks. Judge Abernathy sat on the bench like a gargoyle carved from limestone. He was ancient, with a white beard that reached his chest and eyes that had seen every form of human cruelty. Garrison Blackwood's lawyer was a man from Chicago named Sterling. He wore a suit that cost more than Nathan's entire farm. Sterling did not attack the facts of the land dispute. He attacked Abigail. He called her to the stand. He made her recount every shameful detail of her years in St. Louis. He called her a thief, a liar, a woman of loose morals who had entrapped a naive rancher to hide from her crimes. The gallery buzzed with whispers. Women hid behind their fans. Men smirked. Abigail sat in the witness chair, her face burning, stripped naked by their judgment. Then Sterling turned to the crowd with theatrical flourish. "This woman is a known prostitute," he declared, his voice ringing off the stone walls. "She fled St. Louis to avoid arrest. She used her body to secure this poor man, just as she once used it to secure money. And now she wants the federal government to break a valid contract because she is tired of her own bargain." "Objection!" Black shouted. "But the damage was done." The judge looked at Nathan. "Mr. Bridger," Abernathy growled, "do you have anything to say on your wife's behalf?" Nathan stood. His legs felt like lead. He looked at Abigail, sitting in the witness chair, her head bowed in defeat. She believed the lies they were telling about her. She had heard them so many times she thought they were true. Nathan walked to the front of the courtroom. He did not go to the witness stand. He stood in the center of the room facing the judge directly. "Your Honor," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. "This lawyer says my wife trapped me. He says she used her body to buy me." He took a deep breath. "I want this court to know the truth." He looked at the reporters. He looked at Garrison Blackwood, sitting smug in the back row. He looked at Abigail, and he saw the tears starting to fall. "When my wife arrived in Wyoming last October, she asked me if I wanted to sleep with her. She thought it was her duty. She thought it was the price of the ticket I had paid." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. "I told her no." The murmur became a confused silence. "I told her I did not know how." Dead silence. Absolute shock. Nathan's voice rose, filling the chamber. "I am 26 years old, and I am a virgin. In the West, a man admitting such a thing in public was unheard of. It was social suicide. I have never been with a woman in my life until I met Abigail. I did not marry her for her body. I married her because I was lonely. I wanted a partner. And she did not trap me." He turned to look at Abigail. Tears were streaming down her face. "She saved me." His voice broke, but he pushed on. "She told me her whole story the first week she arrived. She hid nothing from me. She is the bravest person I have ever known in my life. And if decency is now a crime in this court, then lock me up. But do not call her immoral." He turned and pointed a shaking finger at Garrison Blackwood. "That man has more cruelty in his little finger than my wife has in her whole body. She has more honor than he will ever know." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Nathan Bridger had stripped away his own masculine pride, had exposed his deepest shame to the world, all to shield his wife. It was an act of sacrificial love that no one in that room could fail to understand. Judge Abernathy cleared his throat. The sound was like thunder in the silence. "The court finds that the contract held by Mr. Dalton Graves of St. Louis violates the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. It is void." He slammed his gavel. "Furthermore, this court issues a temporary injunction against the Blackwood Cattle Company. You are to stay off the Bridger claim. You are to cease all harassment. You violate this order, and I will send the marshals to burn your entire operation to the ground." He slammed the gavel again. "Case closed." The victory was sweet, but it was brief. As they walked out of the courthouse, Percival Black caught up with them. "Do not celebrate yet," he warned. Blackwood left the building in a hurry. He looked very unhappy. "We have the injunction, but paper burns. Watch your back on the road home." They left Cheyenne within the hour. They were 2 days out when Nathan spotted the dust cloud behind them. 4 riders moving fast. They rode hard into the broken hills, losing their pursuers in the maze of canyons. They arrived at the Sweetwater Valley on the 4th day. But when they crested the final ridge and looked down at their homestead, Nathan felt his heart stop. There were men at the cabin, not 2 or 3, a dozen. They were building new corrals, moving cattle onto the south pasture, Nathan's pasture. And sitting on the porch of Nathan's cabin, his boots propped up on the railing, like he owned the place, was Garrison Blackwood. "He ignored the injunction," Abigail whispered. Nathan lowered his spyglass. "He has the sheriff with him, and the mayor. The paper means nothing here." Abigail pulled a skinning knife from her boot, a blade she had bought in Cheyenne. "If we run now, we run forever." Nathan checked the load in his rifle. "I am done running. Neither am I. But before they could move, a sound came from the road behind them. Wagon wheels. Nathan spun around, rifle raised. But it was not Blackwood's men. It was Edmund Pierce, the dying lawyer, driving a rickety wagon down the trail. Behind him on a mule rode Samuel Vickers, the storekeeper. And behind Vickers, carrying a double-barreled shotgun, was Isaac Brennan, the blacksmith. Pierce pulled up and coughed into a handkerchief beef. He looked terrible, half dead from consumption. But he was grinning. "Mr. Bridger," he wheezed, "the telegraph is a wonderful invention. The Cheyenne leader ran the story of the trial, the virgin cowboy and the cattle baron. It is quite the sensation." Vickers looked scared but determined. "My wife read the article, Nathan. She cried. She said we treated you folks wrong. She made me bring the shotgun." Nathan looked at this ragtag group, a dying lawyer, a terrified shopkeeper, a blacksmith. It was not an army, but it was a start. "Blackwood has a dozen men down there," Nathan said. Pierce shrugged. "And I have a very loud voice and knowledge of federal law. More importantly, there is a United States Marshal on the train from Cheyenne. He will arrive in 2 days. We just have to hold out until then." "2 days," Nathan said. "Can we do it?" Abigail looked at the townspeople who had finally come to stand with them. "We can do it." Nathan turned his horse toward the valley. "Let us go home." They rode down into the valley in the early morning light. Blackwood's men saw them coming and reached for their guns. Confrontation was inevitable. Words were exchanged, threats were made. Then someone fired a shot. Everything exploded into chaos. The gunfight was ugly and desperate. Bullets tore through wood and flesh. Vickers dove for cover behind the water trough. Brennan fired both barrels of his shotgun into the barn wall. In the middle of the chaos, Edmund Pierce stood up. He clutched the federal injunction in his hand, holding it high above his head. "Stop!" he screamed, his voice hoarse but carrying. "This is a federal crime scene. You are all accessories." A shot rang out from the cabin window. Pierce spun around. A red bloom appeared on his chest. He looked down at it with surprise, then crumpled into the snow. The paper fluttered from his dead hand, landing in the mud. Something inside Nathan snapped. He walked out of cover. Bullets kicked up snow around him, but he did not run. He walked with steady, relentless purpose toward the cabin, firing as he went. He reached the porch. Sheriff Dalton stepped in front of him, gun drawn. Nathan looked him in the eye. "Get out of my way, Dalton, or I will go through you." Dalton saw death in those eyes. He lowered his weapon and stepped aside. Nathan climbed the steps. Garrison was scrambling backward, trying to pull a derringer from his coat. Nathan kicked the gun from his hand, grabbed him by the throat, pulled his knife and pressed it against the cattle baron's windpipe. A thin line of blood appeared. "Kill him, Nathan!" Abigail screamed from the yard. "He deserves it!" Nathan looked at the man who had tried to destroy everything he loved. It would be so easy. One motion. But if he did this, he would become the thing he hated. He would become his father. "No," Nathan said. He spun Garrison around and slammed his face into the cabin wall. The cattle baron collapsed unconscious to the deck. In the distance, a train whistle sounded. Riders appeared on the ridge. Men in blue uniforms. Federal marshals. It was over. Spring came late that year, but it came. The snow melted into the creek, swelling the waters until they rushed brown and loud with life. Green shoots of grass pushed up through the black scorch marks where the hay shed had burned. Rebuilding was slow, but they were not alone anymore. Vickers came out every Saturday with supplies. Brennan appeared on Sundays to help frame the new barn. Even a few of the church ladies started nodding to Abigail on the street, though they still kept their distance. They buried Edmund Pierce on the hill overlooking the creek under a cottonwood tree that would shade his grave in summer. Vickers said a few words about courage and justice. Brennan made a cross out of iron. Nathan stood at the grave, his hat in his hands. He believed in the paper, he said quietly. He believed that words on a page could change the world. They received a letter from Cheyenne the following week. Garrison Blackwood had been sentenced to 20 years in the federal penitentiary. Dalton Graves was under investigation in St. Louis. The entire trafficking ring was being dismantled. It was over. One evening in May, Nathan and Abigail sat on their new porch watching the sunset paint the sky in soft pinks and golds. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. Nathan was whittling a piece of cedar. Abigail was mending one of his shirts. "Nathan," she said without looking up. "Yeah." Do you think he has friends, Blackwood? Do you think people will come looking for revenge someday? Nathan stopped whittling. He looked out at the horizon. The West was vast, full of men who held grudges, men who could be bought. Maybe, he said honestly, rich men have long reaches. Abigail put down her sewing. She looked at the Winchester leaning against the doorframe. Are you afraid? Nathan looked at her. He thought about the boy he used to be, the one who hid in his house and apologized for taking up space. Then he thought about the man who had walked through gunfire to protect the woman he loved. Yes, he said, I am afraid. He reached over and took her hand. His palm was rough and warm and steady. But I would rather be afraid with you than safe without you. Abigail squeezed his hand. She looked at the darkening hills where the coyotes were starting to call their evening song. Me too. The West did not promise safety. It did not promise fairness. It only promised that if you were strong enough and brave enough and lucky enough, you could carve out a place to stand. Nathan and Abigail had done that. They had carved out their place with blood and tears and love. As the stars came out one by one over the endless prairie, they sat together on their porch, watching the night settle over the land. Two broken people who had found each other in the wilderness. Two damaged hearts that had learned to beat as one. They had claimed something wilder than any territory. They had claimed each other, and in the small cabin behind them in the rocking chair by the fire, an old man sat with his grandson. The year was 1941. The old man's name was Nathan Bridger, and he was 84 years old. That was 1883, Thomas, he said, his voice rough but warm. I was 26 years old. Your grandmother, God rest her soul, she lived to 84. We had 58 years together on that homestead. Raised 4 children. Buried 2. Thomas sat on the hearth, the draft notice still in his hand, but his grip had loosened. His eyes were wet. Garrison Blackwood died in that federal prison. Pneumonia, never saw daylight again. Edmund Pierce, we named your uncle after him. Good man. He died standing up. Nathan reached out and placed the Winchester in his grandson's hands. The creek still runs, same as it did that winter. You are going off to that war in Europe tomorrow, and I wanted you to know something, son. He leaned forward, his old eyes meeting his grandson's young ones. Fear does not make you weak. Fear makes you careful. It is what you do with the fear that defines you. I walked through bullets once, not because I was not afraid, but because something was more important than the fear. He placed his weathered hand on Thomas's shoulder. You find that thing, son. You find your Abigail, and you fight for it. Thomas nodded, unable to speak. Now go on, Nathan said gently. Your grandmother has supper ready. Thomas stood. He started to speak, then simply embraced his grandfather instead. When he pulled away, he walked to the door, the rifle in his hands, his back straighter than it had been. The door opened, closed. Nathan sat alone in the rocking chair. Outside, the wind moved through the prairie grass, making the same sound it had made for 60 years. For a moment, he was 26 again, standing on that platform, waiting for a woman who would save his life. Abigail, he whispered to the empty room. God, I miss you, girl. The fire crackled, the wind sang, and somewhere in the darkness, 2 souls that had found each other in a hard land were together, still bound by a love that not even death could sever. The reckoning had come, and they had survived it, together.